Hello and welcome to Leading Dragons new series of 2021. Happy New Year, Casey.
Happy New Year, Deborah. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's lovely to see you yet again in your lush garden out in Hawaii.
Thanks. It's nice sitting under the avocado tree.
Whilst I'm in Switzerland, just back from some snowy mountains. Oh, yeah. So we were just talking about that earlier, weren't we? That climate
hmm
can be so extreme and opposite at a given time around the world. So, to our dear listeners, Casey's back for the second time, and we decided between us, and I'm really honoured to start a series of 5 podcasts around training for the times. And if you haven't met Casey yet, you can meet him in a podcast back in November where we talked about a lot of things. We talked a lot about profit-based systems that are destroying themselves. We talked about what does respect mean? What does it look like inside organizations and in leadership? We talked about conscious leadership. We talked about power, what the definition of power was, and whether at the end of the day, it was each one of our choices to either be empowered or disempowered. We also talked about fear, so leading dragons who are fearless leaders. What does it mean and how does that impact the way that we go about making decisions and taking actions? And we also talked about energy, and Casey, you also talked about spiritual jiu-jitsu. And
hmm
I look forward to exploring that a little bit more in this series, a series of 5, which is called Training for the Times. So we're in 2021, and what do we hear? Oh, thank God, 2020's passed, as if by miracle, 2021 will see the coronavirus disappear magically. Well, that ain't going to happen, and let's not kid ourselves and think that 2021 means that it will bring us back to the normal times before the coronavirus hit and the pandemic swept the globe. 2021, I see it so much as opportunity for each one of us to for self-discovery and to reset our personal compasses and to create the new. Casey, I don't know, how do you feel about 2021?
2021 is going to be an interesting year. 2020 as a year, I call it training wheels. It was a year that is actually, we need to learn the lessons from it because it's not going to stop. The interesting thing about 2020 is it was the first year that everyone could see what the future is going to begin looking like. It's the first year where we really saw the cracks of society manifesting where the average person could accept there's a problem here. So 2020 is an interesting year because it's the first year the average person is seeing the problems. So someone like myself, I've been tracking these problems since 1995. And so no surprise. However, for a lot of people, because people are past oriented, they look to the past to predict their future. They didn't see this coming because they were too past oriented. And this is a point, an inflection point where people can begin seeing the future is not going to look like the past anymore. So it's a waking up time, it's a training time. And what's happening in 2019 or 2020 is actually not as extreme as what we were facing up ahead. So if you can't learn from 2020, you're in trouble for the future.
Wow, yeah, and this is also the nature of our Leading Dragon podcast, which is it's not about sugarcoating. It's about being raw, being real, and really being relevant of the times, and strengthening, isn't it? It's about strengthening
hmm
ourselves and each other, and actively deciding how we want to deal with the adversity and the chaos that we're faced with. Which goes back to the training. So Casey, that word training. So it's I like it very much because it's got a positive twist to it. So, you know, and let's look back at 2020 and with reverence and say, well, wow, okay, you know what? You provided me with some serious training here. Some some more than others. So the more
Right.
we were ready to open our eyes and look at what really was happening and recognize the teachings and the learnings and integrate those, the more reverence I believe we would have for 2020. Me personally, it was, as you know, it was a huge year, and but we're not finished yet.
Yep.
So, so we see 2021 as year two of training. So, how many more years have we got of training?
Well, it depends how you define transition. Um, for some of us, well, they'll be for the rest of our life now because the changes that we're in are so, the magnitude of the changes are so large, they will play out for the rest of our lifetime. Um, I mean, if you look at the climate change predictions, they're saying 2100, 1 meter sea rises, the weather changes, and the other geophysical changes that come out of climate change are very real. And so, if you look at it from that perspective, our society and individuals both are going to be constantly evolving against these times. What's also interesting is a lot of people, our instincts are to hunker down. So when bad times happen, the first instinct is to hunker down. So for a lot of people, they didn't train in 2020. And the reason why is they hunkered down. And hunkering down, you're not doing anything. So for a lot of people, the training is going to begin starting in 21. Now the problem is 21 is both going to be more extreme and less extreme. It's going to pulse. And so depending on how you wake up and work with that, it may seem not as bad, and then sometimes it may seem worse. So we can't be confused by the fact that the times will pulse with problems. And so instead of being surprised by each pulse, we need to kind of work with it and be in a stronger position. So for many people, the training is starting now. For some of us, the training started in 2020 because of life changes that are forcing you to make changes. So those people who lost their jobs in 2020 are going to be ahead of the game of the people who didn't because they're already changing. They're already working and it's hard, but they are focusing on improving the way they're living. Some of us started earlier, like I did back in 2000. So depending on what triggered you, your training point starts from there. So that is interesting to think that it's going to be layers of people waking up and then getting involved in improving their situation and life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's like a reset, like yeah, there's going to be a global shift, and it's happening gradually at different times and different momentums for different people. Before
There are a
and
lot of things in play.
yeah, a lot of things at play, and that's what I just like to explore now with you before we
Mm-hmm.
dive into what it means to evolve in the time. So so Casey, what can we expect this year?
Okay, let's look at what we can expect. There's some things we can expect. And back in early 2000, I kind of created a map and we're pretty much on track, but we're about 4 to 8 years ahead of schedule relative to what I saw 20 years ago. So things are still moving along predictably in that sense, unfortunately. Um, one of the things basically we can predict is the 2023 through 2024 election cycle in the United States is going to be probably worse than the one that we just went through. And the chance of the United States going more conservative, more dictatorial are quite high, actually. We're going to see more nationalism around the world as community slash nations try to retain power. They will close down a little bit more. It's going to cause a little bit more conflict. It's going to cause more conservative and again dictatorial trends around the world, not just the United States. We're going to see very disruptive technologies beginning to come into play because as certain problems manifest and cause collapses, there will be opportunities for new things to come into play. Perfect example of that is Elon Musk. If Elon Musk was around in the 50s, he would have been decimated. In fact, Elon Musk of the 50s was Tucker, who tried to create a whole new car. And what happened to him? The car industry crushed him because the system was too strong to allow for new competition to come into that marketplace. So the fact that someone like Elon Musk could come along, create a whole new car, a whole new infrastructure around that car, is a good indicator of collapse, because the old system cannot resist someone like Elon Musk right now. While 50 years ago or 70 years ago, it did. So that's a good indicator right there. So we're going to see disruptive technologies, both good and bad ones, actually. We're going to see electronic currency. We are seeing more dictatorial, like in China, for instance, very much. They're flexing their power. They're trying to consolidate the power. So we have one rising power and meeting a older established power. Historically, whenever that happens, that does mean war. And if you look at this, there is actually a term for it, and it does happen. So right now we're at a higher risk of war than we've been in a long time because of shifting power bases. I also see ecological issues. We're seeing that quite rapidly around the world. So Russia is a good example of this. Every 2 to 3 months, there's been a major ecological disaster in Russia in 2020. It's like clockwork. And that's a bad sign, because that sign shows us that Russia is close to a second collapse. So we had the collapse in Russia in the 90s. It's about to go through another collapse. And the ecological collapses, the mine collapses, the sea dying off the coast, the nuclear disaster that happened that they hushed down. There's been a series of major ecological disasters in Russia, which tells us not only is ecological change speeding up and degradation speeding up, that their infrastructure is degrading even faster. So Russia is at a stage of collapse. So there's a good chance in this decade we'll see Russia go through a second collapse. If that happens, again, increases the chance of war, increases a lot of economic uncertainty and other issues that will come up. So that's quite chaotic. So what we can say is we have this period of time between now and 23 to get ready. So ironically, we're in a good window to improve ourselves and get ready. Now, if you look further out, the predictions of 2050, 2100 of the climate change models, you could probably speed those up. So whatever they were predicting in 2050, you could probably place in happening in 2035. That's a pretty major thing. That means people are not ready for 2050 now. If it happens a good 15 years earlier, that means those changes are being pushed upon us. Climate change is happening faster than people realize. The impacts of climate change are faster than people realize. The buffering of the oceans and the various buffering mechanisms that were in place, slowing it down for a good portion of our previous life, has stopped, which means the feedback mechanisms are kicking up into gear. So faster change. So if that's the case, that 2035 is looking like 2050, it means that 2027 is when ecological issues really kick into gear. Now, think about that for a second. In 2020, we had the world's largest fires in Australia. Billions of animals got decimated in the Australian wildfires. The California wildfires, where the entire country of America was under smoke. And if you see the images of those, of the red skies, and that's pretty amazing. Another interesting fact. So the Pentagon predicted by 2050, there will be 1 billion refugees in the world. No, that's going to happen by 2035. And let's look at that for a second. 1 billion refugees, right? Well, let's look at the United States, supposedly the most developed country in the world. In the month of August or July, over 10% of the population of the state of Oregon were refugees from the fires. I think over 500,000 people were refugees in the state of Oregon. Think about that. In the United States, you had a major refugee population due to climate change already. Mm-hmm. And no one talks about that. No one talks about that type of displacement. But that type of displacement is weakening the ecosystem. It's weakening the social system that we have. So these hits are not stopping right now. They're building up. So when 27 comes along, 27 is the point where the social systems are weak enough that those hits are going to do more damage than what we were expecting. So I have a saying. So this is not doom and gloom stuff. It's just reality. Mm-hmm. And I don't see this as an ending. I see it as a beginning. It's a time to get smart. It's a time to live better. It's a time to live more simply and be nimble. It's a time to build new community. Okay, so this is not bad news I'm talking about. It's just flow. It's just predictable. If you do the math, it's predictable, unfortunately.
Yes.
So instead of pretending, oh, that's not going to happen, let's be understanding, watch the flows, and work with them. I used to work in disease tracking. There's a reason I moved to Hawaii, because I knew pandemic was coming down the pike, and I moved here for a reason, because I knew it would be a place where the pandemic would be slowed down in and wouldn't hit us as hard initially, and that's exactly the way it played out. You can see this stuff if you just look at it. So the data is there. It's just people don't want to believe it nor work to that. And what's really interesting about 2020 is the first year where people are actually beginning to believe it. It's the first year where people can go, oh, now I have a saying, if you do nothing, you get nothing. That's really important. Doesn't matter if you're facing a divorce. It doesn't matter if you're facing a company that has economic problems, ecological changes that we're facing. The same is true. If you do nothing, you get nothing. If
Mm.
you do nothing, you only get what others do. You only get what other people create for you. So if we're entering a time of nationalism and dictatorial situations, if we do nothing, that's what we get.
Mm.
So we have to be aware. In the past, 2,000 years ago, you could run away to be on the mountain. Well, I kind of did. I ran away. I'm living on the two biggest mountains on the earth, living next to the waterfall. I'm here to tell you, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, that's not far enough to run away. It's a global world. There is no place that's local anymore,
Mm-hmm.
which means you have to be willing to build new communities. You have to be willing to strengthen the communities that you're within and not strengthen the communities that are betting on the past. Anything that's past oriented, no, bad bet. So it's really about creating deeper communities where we can work together and be able to empower each other. That's why you're a dragon. So Deborah and I are part of a community that we call the Dragons, and we're around the world and we're helping each other. We're helping each other be stronger and be aware and time everything against. And the reason I created that community was as an individual who likes to be reclusive, I saw the writing on the wall. Being reclusive was a bad thing. And so it's okay to step to the side while problems are happening, but not only do we need to step to the side, we also need to begin building new communities so we can protect each other.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. So I'm,
go ahead.
I just want to, because yeah, we're moving straight in there, and I just want to backtrack to the expectations of 2021,
Right.
and you covered a lot of real stuff that's rolling out, that's going to be rolling out. You talked about nationalism, the increase in nationalism. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you talked about that there's going to be increased tension around the world with people who are wanting to retain power. There's going to be conflict. We're shifting into an era where there's going to be we're at higher risk of war even. You talked also about
Mm-hmm.
cryptocurrency, and we talked about ecological disasters and also the collapsing of infrastructures. And I see this as there's like a positive and a negative disruption, isn't there? Because
Yes.
if we were to really open up our eyes and go, right, okay, so where, what are we to expect for 2021, and how can we best prepare ourselves rather than try and fight it? Or you said like hunker down, like all those who didn't do any training in 2020, that it's all going to catch up with them because they've been busy hunkering down last year.
Right.
And no judgment, right? We're on our own journeys, and so,
Exactly.
so those who've hunkered down in 2020, well, they're going to have to stop doing that, and they're obviously going to be pushed to a point where they're going to have to start opening up their eyes and waking up and actually seeing whether we like it or not. Um,
Exactly.
and so okay, so there's all this, and it's all kind of, and it's interesting because I really, it was interesting, and I sort of interrupted you then when you said, well,
No, it's okay. Please do. I'm going to add something when you're done.
you just interrupt as well. We'll go both ways, right? And you were
Yeah.
saying, yeah, I wanted to move to Hawaii and lead a more reclusive life, and then you have that kind of global responsibility that we are in a global world. We're not in a sort of separate countries and land that's separated from water type world anymore. No. And so what is our role in this, in what's happening as 2021 rolls out, 22, 23 and so on? What are our roles? And our roles as individuals, as the human species, is, must, should change. And we're kind of like having this discussion because we don't have the answers today. We're not sure what the change is actually going to really look like.
Well, we don't need to know what the change is going to look like. That's the cool thing about what I'm going to teach you. What we need to know are the pivot points. I gave you two major pivot points. Pivot point 23 through 24, the next American election cycle, major pivot point. The next pivot point after that would be the 27 one in 2027, where ecological change becomes bigger, more invasive, and more destructive to our social systems. Okay, those are the two major pivot points that we can see. Okay, then 2035, game is on. That's when all those dark predictions are making, we have to be ready for it. So 3 pivot points that we could literally plan for. Now, the good news is we're in this window, 21, 22, and 23, where we, relatively speaking, is quiet enough, the infrastructure is strong enough that we could still get stronger, we could still build community, we could still invest into ourselves and get ready. We could evolve. We're not going to outguess what happens. We're not going to outguess how the elections will go. We're not going to outguess if a war is going to happen or not. What we are going to do is get stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means will change from person to person. And what we are going to do is build stronger new communities, which can be adaptive to the times rather than resistive to those times. Okay. So the first truth is, right now, what can we expect in 21? More of 2020. But it's not overwhelming, it's manageable. So instead of being overwhelmed by it, we need to wake up and begin changing the way we live right now, improving the way we live right now, making those lifestyle changes, corporate changes, company changes to be nimble, stronger, and ready for the changes so you can take advantage of it. Now, the next analogy I'm going to use to tie into this is I live in Hawaii and surfing. And the thing is, when you're surfing and you catch a wave, you just don't sit there to catch a wave. If you sit there to catch a wave, the wave just goes through you and past you. And the bigger the wave, the faster it moves. And the bigger the wave, the more you have to plan for it up front, and the more you have to get ready for that wave.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the wave's coming, you have to begin moving with that wave. And you need to time yourself so the movement that you're in is fast enough so when the wave comes, you're moving with the wave, and then the wave's energy can get onto you, and you can use the wave's energy to further your movement. So there's an energetic practice here. The waves are coming. The 23, 24 wave is coming. The 27 wave is coming. The 35 wave is coming. Those are big waves, which means we need to get some motion in our life. We need to get ready for those changes so we're in a position to take advantage of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's in motion, it's in movement that we learn and that we grow. And it's not by sitting at our desks and overthinking and hunkering down that's where we're going to be missing more opportunities if we continue to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be missing the wave.
Exactly.
We'll be left behind.
So there's a lot we can do in creating the motion that we need. First thing we need to do, very simple one, quite honestly, take care of ourselves, exercise, be in good form, take care of yourself, maintain yourself. If you're broken, you're not going to be in shape to catch up to the wave. Pretty simple, right? Mm-hmm. Yoga, qigong, jogging, meditation, having a strong lifestyle practice, which keeps you in shape, is important, keeps you healthy. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons COVID is so bad is the health of the average person is so low. In other words, COVID is ravaging all the chronic diseases. So chronic disease plus COVID together is actually a bad combination.
And that just gets me to moving into so leading consciously, because leading dragons are fearless dragons, and so they're
Hmm.
fearless because they choose to move forward and to stay in motion despite the fear that each one of us are faced with at some point. Um,
Exactly.
and what you were saying about staying already having like a strong base, so looking after ourselves, so our well-being, our mental, our physical, our spiritual. Actually, earlier on today, I was listening to a lady who's talking about the weapons of mass distraction, because how much time
Yep.
do each one of us spend, no matter how big or small the screen is, at a screen, taking in God knows what information. 2020 was also the year of misinformation, or some people call it disinformation. And it's like, and that
Yep.
also, that are we taking care of ourselves by doing that, by unconsciously or by default, first thing in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, whatever time you wake up, boom, you're on your phone, you're scrolling, you're going on, or you're Netflix binging, or whatever it is. I've heard all sorts, but would you say that sort of these weapons of mass distraction are also part of something that we need to consider for looking after
It
us?
is. Because think about it, mass distraction ends up being doing nothing. If you're distracted, you're doing nothing. So weapons of mass distraction is a weapon by causing people to stop their action, and stopping your action, stop building your life, stop taking care of yourself. You're now doing nothing and you're getting nothing, and it's easier to control you from outside sources.
And how does that look like inside organizations?
Take care of your employees because they are your organization. So that company in Seattle where the owner decided he was going to limit his salary and give everyone the same salary, he took care of his employees. And he did that before the COVID. And what happened? His company did extremely well because his staff, his employees stood behind him and worked harder, and they were healthier because he was taking care of them. So in the modern corporate thing, which is based on profit, which is based on consumption, the companies don't take care of their employees. They consume their employees until they're broken, and then they release them. And so the fact of the matter is, build community. And a company and a corporation, if they can't build community, they're just going to get weaker and weaker over time.
And they see their company lifeblood just as a resource.
Yep,
Oh, they're just human resources. Okay, so let's
exactly.
just use them, chew them, and spit them out when they're done.
Yes.
And
And so those companies that are doing that are becoming more and more fragile, and they're breaking down in the current economic crises. They're not the ones that are going to make the distance.
yeah, because people have also had that time to slow down last year, particularly, and to look at, is this what I really want? Is this something that I still tolerate? Is this something that I still, is this really how I want to be treated? Is
Mm-hmm.
this the kind of company that I really want to be working for? The type of employer that I want to be working for? Which moves us into, so going back to leading consciously, conscious leaders. Um, After looking after ourselves, what about looking inside ourselves?
In that, there's several aspects of that. One aspect is simplification. The more you hold, the more energy you're spending holding those things. Infrastructure is important. You want to build infrastructure that's resilient, that can survive the times up ahead, infrastructure that supports you. You don't want to build infrastructure that you're holding. So the difference is if I'm holding this cup, I'm spending energy to hold this cup. Now this cup is infrastructure. It's allowing me to hold a drink. So it's serving a purpose, but it's coming at a cost. I have to hold it. So the more infrastructure that you build that you're holding and maintaining through heavy costs, the worse it's going to be for you. So one of the things as individuals and corporations we need to do is simplify. Because the more we simplify, the more we are not wasting unneeded energy towards things we don't need to support. So there is a idealization of having strong infrastructure, but a simplified infrastructure at the same time.
And that brings me to also the resource. We talk about resources, so human resources, financial resources, but also time is a resource. And
Mm-hmm.
when I hear you about simplifying, I also see the need for companies to simplify the way that they work.
Yes.
And burnout and stress and disease inside organizations, one of the key factors or the culprits is excessive collaboration, heavy governance. So many meetings, so many indecisive people, and what's that? That sort of sucking away so much energy because so much time is spent not doing very much at all. We're going back to distraction here.
So some companies will be able to make the change and some will not. So the thing is, the truth is, be smart. The way to be smart is not to choose the winners, ironically enough. The way to be smart is to avoid the losers. The way to be smart is to move away from the places you shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, in a time of ecological disaster or collapse, you shouldn't be living near a nuclear power plant, quite honestly. Those things are hard to maintain. I am an engineer, and I can tell you the way they're not built the best, unfortunately, for maintenance and sustainability. So in times of collapse, that's not a place I want to be. Chernobyl, Fukushima. So one of the things we could probably expect is another breakdown. So living near a nuclear power plant, place not to be.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise for companies. There are companies that just not going to make it. They are melting down. So avoid the companies which are melting down. Avoid the companies which aren't going to make the distance because they're not worth the time. They're already being picked apart and salvaged, and the system's already like parasitically destroying a lot of these companies anyway. So don't get in that action. Step aside of it and work on avoiding the companies and places you shouldn't be while getting stronger, while preparing.
And when you say the places where you shouldn't be, this also applies to ourselves,
Yes,
um,
it really does.
which is, and I go back to again to like that slowing down of, and a lot of people working remotely last year, and taking that perspective, taking a step back from the work environment, and gaining insight and thinking, oh my gosh, so this work environment just does not suit me. I want to get a balanced lifestyle back. Yeah. And all this comes back to looking inside ourselves, because so often we think we know what we need, but how much time do we actually spend, recognizing, okay, what are our needs? What are our values? What is our integrity? So what are the
And that's what this year is all about, by the way. What you just said is what 21 is all about. It's a time to go inward to figure out exactly what that is. Because if you figure out what your goals truly are, you figure out what infrastructure you want to support, if you figure out what your core business is, if you figure out your core values, this is a year to protect those and get them in position, because that way in 22, you could begin building them and building up that speed to catch the next wave and ride around it.
Mhm.
So 21 is a critical year for introspection. 21 is a critical year for rebalancing things and getting ready for disruptions. And so that way, when they happen, you're not being hit by them. And it was an easy thing to do.
Yeah. Now it sounds simple when you say it like that, Casey, but how many people do have that um, how should I say, that kind of sincere, that hone in time to really hone in on.
If you use it, everyone does. The problem is no one uses it. The reason no one uses it is because the majority of individuals tend to be past oriented. And when you're past oriented, looking to the past to predict the future, you're holding off. You're waiting for conditions to match something you know so you can build again, so you can move ahead again.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, what's up ahead doesn't match what's behind in any sense of prediction models. So there's a few times we could go back to predict things on, like when the printing press got introduced to Europe, there was a 70-year period where there were 50 revolutions across Europe due to the change of information. So there are a few things we could look back on, make some predictions on, like changing country bases due to information changes. But other than that, what most people are looking at in the past is wrong. So this is a year to stop looking at the past. It's a year to stop saying we were great. This is time to go, wait a minute, we need to relook at ourselves rebalance ourselves. Everyone can do that. Everyone has had that holy moment of, holy, look what just happened this year in 2020. So it isn't as if we don't know something's happening now. So it's just the choice to be proactive and say, okay, what do I need to live better? How do I need to improve my company? What do I need to do? I work with companies, and some of the companies I worked with, they're already ready for this 2020 ahead because I was working with them in 2018 to get ready for this because it was apparent it was happening. So you don't need to be forward looking anymore because it's happening now.
Yeah.
So anyone can be introspective to rebalance their lifestyle, to make their life less burdensome. And so it's something we all could do now, but most, again, won't because they don't want to. It's not a question, can we? It's a question of want. See, in 27, that's a question where it won't matter what you want. You'll have to do what you need to do. 27 is a pivot point of need. Need will dictate actions. Right now, we still have the luxury of not being pushed by need, though more and more people losing their jobs are being pushed by that need to change their lifestyle now. So for instance, for you, as you hit your burnt out point, your burnout at your corporation forced you a need to change your lifestyle, didn't it, Deborah?
Definitely, yeah. And it.
So
Mhm.
go ahead.
No, keep going.
So the thing is, more and more people are being pushed into need right now, but you can still get by doing nothing on the general for a lot of people. By 27, there's no more room. It's going to be a need response. The changes are so big at that point.
Yeah.
What we're doing is what we need. So unless you're ready by 27, no, you're not. It's too late at that point.
Yeah.
But we have this time now to get ahead of that change. We have time now to simplify, to avoid the places we shouldn't be, to use the collapses that do happen to be better.
Mm. And this goes back to conscious leadership and the paradigm of traditional leadership that's just like, you know what, it's not working anymore. Just what about if you just put your hands up and go, right, okay, this is where we're at. We're facing this adversity, this chaos. Let's sit together and for leaders to go, you know what, I don't have the answers. So let's sit together and let's think it through. Let's brainstorm. Let's try out new things. These are all. I mean, it's nothing new, right? But it still seems
But
to be so barely practiced by organizational leaders. Hence the old paradigms that are
let me
still.
give you an analogy here or a perspective to show why it's a challenge we're facing. The current modern system that we're in started with the East and West India corporations. So they've been around for about 600 years now. Okay. So the current system we're in, if you were to go from its roots, is 600 years old. This shows us something. It took 600 years to evolve to where we are now. We're at a point of what you could say is chaos. And I'm a Taoist. We teach the sage does not bring order to chaos. Chaos is not bad. Chaos is change. Chaos is new. Okay. So the real truth is we're at a pivot point for the culture. So what's evolved 600 years, we have a problem. We need to be ready in the next 15 years to be ready to adapt to the new reality of the globe that we live on. So we have to evolve. 600 years of evolution has to evolve over the next 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a challenge.
Yeah.
People don't move that fast.
Mm.
And if we move too fast, you'll get hurt. You'll be pulled back by people trying to slow down the change. The thing is, we can't slow down the change because we've been given climate change. We don't have the luxury of 600 years to evolve into something new because climate change is a bigger process that we have to evolve against.
Yeah. So it's accelerating. You talked about faster change. So it's also not only the changes and the uncertainty around that and the chaos that it is bringing, but it's also this acceleration with it too.
Mm-hmm.
What is it, Casey, that, with this uncertainty, um, what can we start doing? Because obviously this impacts the way that we operate on a daily basis. individually?
Again, that's the same question that we just went over. Simplify your life, stay in shape, build your community, refine your infrastructure so it's more resilient and stronger and simplified. And that's both at the individual level and the corporate level. It's at the business level and the individual level. I'm a business owner. The very same things I'm doing to keep my business alive and thriving through COVID and these changes are the very same things I'm doing as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
Not any different, actually.
Yeah. It's the question of the uncertainty, because most of us, we're animals.
Remove the uncertainty from the picture. There is no uncertainty. We know change is coming. See, that's the problem. When you talk about like uncertainty, people lose their power because they stop, because they wait until they're certain before they act. People don't like to jump into the unknown. So we have to flip the equation. Rather than focus on the uncertainty, we have to focus on the certainty. What's the certainty? You and I can live a better life. What's the certainty? We can continue to build out our businesses to evolve and fit into the new paradigms up ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Those are certainties. That's what we need to work to. Certainty. We know that 23 is a pivot point. We know 27 is a pivot point. We know 21 is going to be slow relative to that. See, in 2027, people are going to look back at 2020 and go, oh, wasn't that cute? We thought that was a bad year. Look what we're dealing with now. They're going to look at 2020 and think it was a cute year, for God's sake. So the fact of the matter is, we have this year, 21, where we have a chance to catch up with ourselves. We have a chance to revise the way we live and revise the way our companies work. A lot of corporations won't want to change. If you're in that type of corporation, get out, leave.
Mm.
That's a place not to be.
And
remember I said,
leave it.
What?
And the longer you leave it, the longer you stay in that company, knowing very well that you need to leave, the harder it's going to be. And you'll
Yes.
get left behind, and you would have missed
Yes.
that wave.
Yes. So the truth is, there are a lot of people who I helped leave their jobs this year in 2020, which is counterintuitive. And a lot of my students I actually helped leave their job, and they're getting better jobs.
Mm.
Where do you want to be in a mass downturn? You want to change your job early in the process so you have a stronger job to weather it longer. You want to get out of the places that are going to crack first. And we can see a lot of those corporations or companies which are cracking now. If you're in one of those companies, you know it. The talk in the company is going, how are we going to survive this? And the more you try to do what used to work, the more likely that company is going to fail. Because what used to work, it's not going to work up ahead.
Mm-hmm. And it's no longer sustainable.
No.
So we need to be shifting our conversations. We need to be transforming our conversations, first with ourselves and with the people around us, the people that we work with, and as leaders in our lives, and not only leaders in our work environments. And this is where, it's time now. It's time for us to step out of our comfort zones and work with ambiguity, work with the unknown. And this reminds me of this spectrum that I drew the other day, which is on the one end you've got fear, and then on the other hand, on the other end you've got faith or love. So at the end of the day, both of them are like, so where do you want to be sitting? Where do you want to be operating from? Do we want to be working still and operating still from a place of fear, where you keep your mouth shut, where you try, you hunker down and did all that of 2020, or because this is like you said, isn't it, Casey? It's a choice that each one of us can make consciously, as conscious as leading dragons, which is, what?
Exactly.
I'm done operating from fear now. I don't want to do fear-based decision making anymore, and fear-based thinking and trying to solve problems with the same old thinking patterns, and yet they're new products. So actually, you're not really solving the problems. I'm actually moving to a place of faith, of love. I'm going to start being a fearless leader in my life. And that means, yes, it does mean stepping right out of your comfort zone. It does mean working with ambiguity. It's stepping into the unknown, like you said. So how could you give us some maybe some tips, some tools of how we can do that, how we can make that shift.
So we use fear. We don't ignore fear, we use fear. We release fear. So fear is not a bad thing. What fear represents is a negative potential. The problem is we're wired to pay more attention to fear than positivity. In the jungle, something we fear is likely to kill us. Something that kills us ends the game right away. End game scenarios need to be paid attention to. So fear is a negative potential. So we need to turn around and use the fear and release it. We don't want to hold on to a negative potential because then we lose. It will eat us for lunch. Rather, when we sense a fear, so for instance, I fear falling. If I'm near a cliff and if I fear falling, what does that tell us to do? Step away from the cliff. However, if there's a fire coming from me, behind me, ecological change, right? I can't run into the fire and I have a cliff, I can't jump off. So what does that fear do? If I fear the cliff, I'm not going to move ahead. I can't move back because the fire is behind me. So now I use the fear. I know there's a cliff. So now instead of being fearful of the cliff, I'm going to look for, I don't want to fall. So let's find a path through this cliff. And I'm going to work with it. The fear is identifying a challenge to work against. And you work against that challenge now. If you fear losing your job, maybe it's time to leave the job to get a new job. If you fear losing the job, maybe it's time to reinvent your job at your corporation. See, if you fear and hunker down, that's not going to work. Doing nothing in a time of problems and collapse means that fear will probably become real. And if you give it more energy, it's more likely to become real. So use it as an awareness of what to work against.
Yeah.
If you do that, it becomes a tool.
So facing the fear, turning around, like you said, turn around, look at it straight in the eye, and decide to consciously release it.
Release it and work with it, work against it to release it. And that's going to be a lot of it because we're going to have to make hard choices and we're going to have to jump into the unknown more than once. So now if we're going to be jumping into the unknown, remember the thing I said earlier, be in good shape. So you be in good shape, create your organization to be in good shape because then when you jump in the unknown, you're strong enough to deal with whatever you face. If you jump in the unknown and you have chronic fatigue and you have a broken leg, you're going to die because you won't be able to navigate that challenge you face in that unknown jump.
Yeah.
So the advice I gave, exercise, keep in shape, the same true for corporations, take care of your people, get them in shape, make sure they're healthy and want to be part of the team and back you up. That way, when you do make those changes, you're ready to face those changes and evolve and make it your own.
And that goes back to the baseline of trust, because without trust, there's not much that can be done at all.
Exactly. We have to have, in the baseline trust we have to have in the end, is faith in ourselves, faith in the people we connect to, faith in the communities that we build, and faith in the places we invest into. I'm not going to invest any time working for any corporation that doesn't invest back into me.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So from here, Casey, we're going to wrap up. Our first of 5 about training. We covered a lot about the expectations of this new year, 2021. You talked about a change, not only chaotic change, and we talked about positive and negative disruption, but we talked also about faster change. And that this is the year, you said it very beautifully, you said this is the year where we need to catch up with ourselves.
Yes, catch up with ourselves, catch up with the reality of what's slowly evolving around us, reposition ourselves so we're ready to move ahead as the more bigger pivot points do come upon us. We've been given this 2021, 21-2, our gifts. It's a gift that we can use to build and get ready for what's up ahead.
Mhm.
If you use it as a gift, you're going to do quite well. You will thrive and begin being part of the new ecosystem that's evolving. If you pause, you get nothing, and then you get stuck in whatever mess that's left behind.
Yeah, that's just wasting time. So we've got no more time to lose. It's
Nope.
time for each one of us now to look at the reality straight in the eye and decide and make the choice, that individual choice. Do we want to run away from the fear or hunker down from the fear, or do we want to face it and work with it?
Mm-hmm.
So, Casey, thank you so much. That was, as always, a very rich conversation. And so next month, that will be our second of our 5 series. We'll be talking about stepping aside of the chaos. So till
Perfect.
then, have a good January. Casey, do you want to say one last piece?
The closing thing is, because we have two pivot points, the 23, 24 one and 27 one, the way it looks like is the next 2 to 3 years, preparation, getting ready. Then around 23, 24, wherever you end up deciding is where you want to make your stand, your fight, to build against, then you have 3 years to build and get ready for that next major pivot point. So the first pivot point is get ready, simplify, and improve. Then once you get relocated to where you want to be, establish a new baseline, build out that baseline for 3 years, and then you'll be ready for the bigger changes.
Okay. Thank you, Father of Leading Dragons, and
Mm-hmm.
see you on our next series next month.
Mahalo. Much honored to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Casey.